The orchard had been abandoned for so long that even the trees no longer tried to bloom. Their branches were thin, twisted, heavy with lichen instead of leaves. Apples hadn't grown here in years. The grass had turned to straw, and the ground smelled of rust and rain. A fox moved through it quietly, her fur a soft flame against the dull gray of evening. She didn't hurry. She knew this place. The broken fence, the hollow shed, the silence that belonged to no one. When she passed, the air barely moved. Only the faint sound of her paws, pressing the damp soil, broke the stillness. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called once, then stopped. The fox paused at the edge of the orchard, head low, eyes half closed. The smell of smoke lingered in the air, faint, cold, long gone. She listened. Nothing. Only wind brushing through the dead trees. Then she walked on. The shed stood where the path curved. It had leaned to one side, its roof caved in under years of rain. She stepped inside anyway, ducking through the gap in the wall. The air inside was dry and smelled faintly of hay. In one corner lay a pile of wooden crates, half collapsed, and in another, a single boot, cracked and gray. She sniffed it once, then turned away. There was no food here, no threat either. Only the memory of hands that had once worked this land, now gone, leaving their shape in the dust. When she stepped outside again, the light had changed. The sky was fading to blue, the kind that comes just before night truly arrives. The fox stopped, watching the horizon through the skeletal trees. The world was quiet, but not empty. Even silence had weight here. She moved toward the fence line. The boards were old, half buried in grass. Her body slipped between them with practiced ease. For a moment, her tail brushed against one of the posts, and a flake of old paint came loose, drifting down like ash. She stopped at the far edge of the orchard and looked back. The trees stood motionless, a forest of shadows against the dying light. Somewhere deep within them, a door creaked open in the wind. The shed, remembering what it meant to move. Then, all was still again. Down the hill beyond the last row of trees lay the road, cracked asphalt, overgrown with weeds. The fox crossed it in a single bound. No one saw her, no one ever did. But for a brief moment when she reached the other side, the air seemed to shift, as if something in the orchard had exhaled. The grass bent in her wake. The wind turned, and then she was gone. The orchard stayed behind, empty once more. It would wait another season, and another after that, for footsteps that never came back. The road curved away from the orchard like a thought half forgotten. Its surface was cracked and uneven, weeds growing through the lines where wheels hadn't passed in years. The fox walked along the edge, her paws silent against the damp asphalt. The smell of smoke was stronger here. Wood smoke, faint but real. It carried the scent of ash and pine, and something else beneath it. Food. She stopped, lifted her head and breathed deeply. Somewhere ahead, someone had lit a fire. She followed the scent through the fog that hung low over the fields. The world was quiet. No engines, no voices, only the distant trickle of melting snow and the whisper of dry grass brushing her legs. The path led her to what had once been a farmhouse. Its roof sagged, one window boarded up, the others filled with glass clouded from the inside. The chimney smoked faintly, thin gray threads rising into the air. The fox crouched near the ditch, watching. A man sat outside by the fire. He was older, his hair silver and thin, his coat too large. He stirred a pot resting on the coals, slow, steady, as if time didn't matter. She could smell the food now. Broth, meat, salt. The man paused, looking out toward the field. His eyes lingered on the orchard in the distance, the one she had just left. Then he turned back to the fire. The fox crept closer, quiet as breath. She stopped 10 paces away. The man didn't move, but his hand reached to the ground beside him. He picked up a small piece of bread, old and dry, and set it near the edge of the firelight. Then he spoke, voice rough from disuse. "You'll come back," he said softly. "Everything does." He didn't look at her. He just leaned back, listening to the wind. The fox waited until he turned his gaze away. Then she approached, nose low, tail still. The bread smelled of smoke and rain. She took it gently, carried it a few feet away, and ate. The man chuckled once, a dry sound, half memory, half breath. Didn't think anyone still walked that orchard, he said. The fox froze, but the man didn't move. He just stared into the fire, eyes reflecting the glow. Used to be my father's, he said. He planted those trees when I was a boy. Said the earth remembers kindness. He stirred the pot again. Guess it remembers everything else, too. The wind shifted. The fire's smoke blew toward the orchard, carrying the man's scent back along the road. The fox's ears flicked. She turned her head once toward the orchard, now just a shadow against the sky. Then she looked back at the man. He hadn't moved. She stayed a little longer, listening to the pop of wood and the sigh of the trees in the distance. Then, quietly, she slipped away into the dark. When the man looked up again, the bread was gone. He smiled faintly. Always leaving, he said to the empty air. Always quiet. He stood, poured a small bit of the soup into a bowl, and set it near the fire's edge before going inside. The flames flickered, painting the air orange. The bowl steamed in the cold, and out by the orchard, beneath the bare trees, two sets of tracks crossed paths in the mud. One human, one fox, then faded under falling rain. By the third night, the man had grown used to the silence. It wasn't empty anymore. It was expectant, like the pause before someone answers. He built the fire again, smaller this time, just enough to warm his hands. The night was colder, the wind sharper. Frost clung to the weeds that framed the road. He set another piece of bread by the fire and waited. The fox came later than before. She appeared at the edge of the light, half shadow, half ember. Her fur gleamed faintly with frost, and her breath came out in soft, white curls. The man didn't look up. He stirred his pot, same as every night, slow and steady. I wasn't sure you'd come back, he said quietly. The fox froze. Her ears flicked once, then twice. You don't owe me anything, he continued. Guess we just keep each other company, in our own ways. The wind carried his voice away into the field. The fox took a few steps closer, head low. She stopped near the bread, sniffed, and took it gently in her teeth. Then she sat down, not too close, not too far, just where the light of the fire met the dark. The man smiled. Guess that's close enough. They stayed that way for a long time, two figures by the fire, framed by an orchard that no longer bloomed. Sometimes he talked. Not much, just enough to make the silence feel like a friend instead of a wall. He spoke about his father, about harvests long gone, about how the apples used to fill the air with sweetness when the wind was right. The fox didn't understand the words, but she listened anyway. Her tail curled around her paws, her eyes half closed. Every now and then, when the fire cracked too loudly, she flinched, then looked back at him, reassured by his stillness. By the fifth night, frost had covered the ground like dusted glass. The man came outside carrying two things, a lantern and an apple. The fruit was small, shriveled, one of the last from the old trees, forgotten in the shed. He placed it beside the bread. Used to mean something, he said. Maybe it still does. The fox approached, slower this time, her steps careful. She sniffed the apple, then looked up at him. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. Amber against gray. The man's breath caught. He had seen many things vanish in his life. People, places, seasons. But in that moment, he felt something return. Something small. Alive. The fox took the apple gently, not to eat, but to carry. She turned and disappeared into the trees. The man watched her go. He stayed outside long after the fire died. When he finally rose, the orchard glowed faintly in the moonlight. Frost shimmered on the branches, turning them silver. He could almost swear the trees stood a little taller that night. The next morning, when he went to fetch water from the well, he found the apple. It lay at the base of one of the orchard trees, untouched, shining faintly with dew. Around it were fresh tracks, delicate and sharp, the fox's. He stood there for a long time, his hand resting on the trunk. The bark was cold beneath his palm, but beneath that, a faint warmth, the pulse of something waking. He smiled to himself, not sure why. That evening, he built the fire again. He didn't call. He didn't speak. He simply set down another apple beside the bread, and when he sat back in his chair, he thought he heard something new. Faint, soft, distant. The orchard. rustling, whispering, almost like it remembered its own name. The frost never truly left the valley that winter, but the orchard began to change in small, quiet ways. At first, it was just the ground, patches of thawed earth where the fox had walked, soft and dark against the pale grass. Then, the trees nearest her path began to drip earlier in the mornings, sap moving under bark that should have still been asleep. The man noticed it one dawn when he stepped outside with his lantern. Mist hung over the field, turning every sound into a whisper. He followed the faint prints through the frost, paw marks so delicate they looked painted onto the earth. At the base of one tree, something caught the light. A bud. Just one. Small, white, no larger than a fingernail. He touched it with a shaking hand. The wood was alive. He stood there for a long time, breath fogging the air, eyes fixed on that single bud. The cold bit through his coat, but he barely felt it. The orchard hadn't bloomed in almost 20 years. Not since the last harvest, not since his father's hands had turned the soil. He smiled without meaning to. Then he looked toward the far fence, where the fox always disappeared. "Guess the world still has surprises," he murmured. The fog carried his words away, soft as breath. That night, he built the fire again. He didn't bring bread or apples this time, only warmth. He sat beside it, hands open, eyes on the dark between the trees. When the fox came, she didn't linger at the edge of the light as she used to. She walked straight to the fire, her fur shimmering with frost, her movements slow and calm. The man didn't move. She stopped a few steps away and lowered her head, eyes glinting like coals. The reflection of the firelight made her look unreal for a moment. Not magical, just alive in a way the world had forgotten to be. He nodded to her. "Seems you've been busy." The fox blinked once, slow, then sat down. Her tail brushed the ground, leaving a faint curve in the frost. The fire crackled softly. Above them, the orchard creaked, not from wind, but from something shifting deep in its wood. The man listened. It almost sounded like breathing. Over the next week, the thaw spread. He found new buds on 3 more trees, all along the path where the fox walked at night. The air smelled faintly of sap again, sharp, clean, alive. He started talking to the trees as he worked, the way his father once did. Told them about the weather, the fox, the river thawing beyond the hill. He wasn't sure who he was speaking to anymore. The trees, the animal, or the part of himself that had gone quiet for too long. Every evening the fox came. Every morning something new grew. On the 7th day the first blossom opened. It wasn't much, 5 small petals, white and trembling in the cold wind. But it was enough to turn the air sweet, faintly perfumed with something the world hadn't smelled in years. The man stood beneath it, eyes closed. He didn't cry, though something inside him wanted to. When he opened his eyes again, the fox was there, halfway across the field, watching him. She stayed until the wind shifted. Then, she turned and slipped through the fence, vanishing into the tall grass without sound. That night, as the fire burned low, he looked toward the orchard. The trees swayed gently, their branches moving in rhythm, not with the wind, but with something slower, deeper. And for the first time since his father's death, he spoke out loud without meaning to. "Thank you," he whispered. The words carried across the field, disappearing into the quiet between the trees. A faint rustle answered. The orchard exhaled, a soft sound barely there, and in that moment, he could almost hear footsteps in the frost. Light, careful, moving away. The fox leaving once more. No one saw her, but everywhere she walked, life followed. It happened on a night that began like any other. Gray clouds, the faint smell of snow, and the sound of wind moving through the bare trees. The man had almost given up expecting anything more. The blossoms he had seen days before were already darkening with frost, their brief color fading back into winter's gray. He sat inside that evening, the fire whispering low in the stove. Outside, the orchard slept, or so it seemed. Then, sometime near midnight, the wind changed. It came softly at first, then warmer, pulling the smoke from the chimney sideways. The man felt it through the window cracks, air that didn't belong to February. He stood, went to the door, and opened it. The night was no longer cold. Mist covered the field, thin and silver under the moon. And in that mist, something shimmered, faint light catching along the rows of trees, as though each branch had begun to glow from within. He stepped out barefoot, not feeling the chill. The ground was damp, not frozen. The frost had melted in one night. He walked toward the orchard, the grass wet against his ankles. The closer he came, the stronger the scent grew. Sweet, faintly sharp, impossible. When he reached the first row, he stopped. The trees were in bloom, every branch, every limb, covered in white petals that quivered in the warm wind. They caught the moonlight and threw it back like snow that had learned how to shine. He touched one. It felt real, cool, damp, alive. The air itself seemed to hum, the sound low and steady, like the orchard breathing. He walked deeper among the trees, his lantern swinging low. Petals drifted down in the breeze, catching in his hair and clinging to his coat. The smell filled the air. Apple blossoms, wild and clean, stronger than memory. Halfway through the orchard, he stopped again. A shape moved between the trunks. He raised the lantern slowly. There, by the oldest tree, the one his father had planted first, stood the fox. Her fur was bright against the dark bark, her tail long, her eyes gold. She didn't move when the light found her. She just stood there, watching him. For a moment, the distance between them disappeared. He thought of his father's voice, of the words that used to fill this orchard. The earth remembers kindness. He thought of the nights by the fire, of the bread, of the small white bud that had begun all this. He lowered the lantern. "You did it," he whispered. The fox tilted her head, then turned. She walked between the trees, her fur brushing against the blossoms. Each place she passed, petals fell, soft as snow, silent as breath. By the time she reached the edge of the orchard, the ground behind her looked like winter again, only warmer, alive. She stopped once at the fence line and looked back. Then she was gone. The man stayed until morning. The light came slow and blue, washing over the white blossoms. When the first sun touched the trees, their color shifted, from ghostly silver to the pale green of spring. He laughed quietly, almost afraid of breaking the moment. He reached up, picked one petal from the lowest branch, and held it between his fingers. It smelled of rain. He looked toward the road beyond the orchard, but the fox didn't return. Only the grass moved, bending in a wind that carried her scent away. By noon, the warmth had already begun to fade. The frost would come back, he knew. The blossoms would wither. But for one night, the orchard had remembered how to live. He would tell no one. There was no one to tell. But every spring afterward, when the snow melted and the ground turned soft again, he would light a small fire by the fence and leave an apple there. Just one. And sometimes, when the mist rolled in and the trees shivered, he would swear he saw movement among the trunks, a streak of red, quiet as breath, vanishing between the rows. No one saw her leave that first night. No one ever did. But the orchard still bloomed every year after, and when the wind passed through it, the petals always fell toward the road she had taken, as though the trees were bowing in gratitude to something wild that had remembered them.